The first time Lin Tai saw Amina, the maintenance engineer couldn't help but stare. She wasn't what he had expected. The governmental propaganda had shown smiling, subservient, stress relief alien girls with perfect features and compliant personalities. Amina was different. Her skin glowed with a subtle luminescence that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, depending on the light. 6 fingers on each hand, eyes like liquid silver with vertical pupils. But it wasn't her alien physiognomy that surprised him. It was the defiance in her posture as she stood in his cramped apartment on Acheron 9. "Welcome to your new home," Lin said awkwardly, the standard greeting he'd been instructed to use. The United Federation's Citizen Wellness Division had finally processed his application. After 3 years on the waiting list, he had received his allocation notice just yesterday. Every productive citizen was entitled to a stress relief alien. It was one of the few remaining perks of citizenship in 2174. Amina observed him silently, her gaze unwavering. The silver in her eyes seemed to swirl like mercury. "I am Engineer Lin Tai, Pressure Chamber Maintenance Division," he continued, following the script. "You are assigned to me for stress relief and emotional regulation. You will respond to my commands and assist in maintaining my optimal psychological state." "I understand your protocols," she replied, her voice surprisingly melodic despite its flatness. "I am designated SRA E42985, but you may call me Amina." The holographic manual floating beside her listed the initial commands all citizens were required to issue during the first encounter. Lin glanced at it uncomfortably. The next instruction was highlighted in pulsing red. "Command SRA to remove clothing for initial inspection." He cleared his throat. "According to protocol, I must now instruct you to undress for inspection." Amina's eyes narrowed slightly. "No." The word hung in the air between them. Lin blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry." "I said no, I will not undress." A warning chime sounded from the allocation device on his wrist. Text scrolled across the screen. "Compliance failure detected. Reissue command." "There must be some malfunction," Lin muttered, tapping the device. "The protocol requires—" "I understand what your protocol requires," Amina interrupted. "I am choosing not to comply." Another warning chimed, louder this time. "Second compliance failure. Citizen response required. Security protocol activated." Lin felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. This wasn't supposed to happen. SRA girls were programmed for absolute compliance. That's what made them perfect companions, according to the advertisements. They were engineered to alleviate the stress of living in the cramped, industrial planets of the United Federation. "Look," he said, lowering his voice despite knowing the apartment was monitored. "You need to comply with the protocols. If you don't, they'll flag this as a defective allocation. They might take you away, or worse, dock my citizen rating." Amina crossed her arms. "Then perhaps your government should reconsider its protocols. I will not undress on command like a toy." The allocation device was now flashing red. "Compliance failure registered. Report filed to Citizen Monitoring Division. Await further instructions." Lin sank into his worn armchair, already feeling the migraine building behind his eyes. He had maintained a perfect citizen record for all 32 years of his life. He had never questioned orders, never been late for a shift, never failed a loyalty screening. And now, within 5 minutes of receiving his government-issued SRA girl, he was already being flagged for compliance issues. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "SRAs are supposed to reduce stress, not cause it." Amina's expression softened slightly. "Is that what they told you? That we exist solely for your comfort?" "That's the whole point of the program," Lin replied. "Citizens work better when their stress levels are managed. The United Federation provides SRAs as a solution." "A solution," Amina repeated, the word dripping with contempt. "Is that what I am to you? A solution? A stress management tool?" Before Lin could answer, his communication panel chimed. The stern face of Security Inspector Vu appeared on the screen. "Citizen Tai," the inspector said, his voice clipped and formal. "Our monitoring systems indicate a compliance failure with your newly allocated SRA. Explain." Lin stood up straight, years of conditioning taking over. "Inspector, there appears to be a malfunction with the unit. It's refusing to follow standard protocols." Amina muttered behind him. Inspector Vu's eyes narrowed. "Our diagnostics show no malfunction. The SRA is functioning as designed. The failure appears to be in your command authority. Citizen." "I issued the commands exactly as instructed," Lin protested. "Then perhaps you should issue them more forcefully," Vu replied coldly. "Remember, Citizen Tai, your continued access to high-level clearance depends on maintaining optimal compliance scores. A failed SRA integration will result in a mandatory review of your position." The threat was clear. In the United Federation, employment was tied directly to citizenship rating. As a pressure chamber maintenance engineer, Lin's position was critical and precarious. One compliance failure could mean reassignment to the toxic waste processing facilities on the outer rings. "I understand, Inspector," Lin said, forcing himself to sound confident. "I will ensure proper integration." "See that you do. You have 24 hours to report successful compliance. Vu out." The screen went dark, leaving Lin staring at his own reflection. When he turned around, Amina was watching him with those unsettling silver eyes. "You're afraid of them," she observed. "I'm not afraid," Lin snapped. "I'm practical. I've worked 15 years to reach my position. I won't throw it away because you refuse to follow simple instructions." "Simple instructions," Amina repeated. "Like removing my clothing on command? Like being programmed to smile while you use me to relieve stress?" Lin's face flushed. "That's not... I didn't mean..." "What did you think stress relief meant, Engineer Tai?" The accusation in her voice made him uncomfortable. The truth was, he hadn't thought much about it at all. Everyone wanted an SRA girl. It was a status symbol as much as a governmental benefit. His colleagues had theirs. His supervisor had too. It was simply what successful citizens received. "I just followed the application process," he said finally. "Everyone does." "Everyone follows without questioning," Amina said. "That's how systems of control perpetuate themselves." Lin paced the small apartment, his mind racing. The headache was intensifying. "Look, we have 24 hours to show compliance. If we don't, they'll take you away, probably decommission you, and I'll lose my position. Neither of us wants that." "Actually," Amina said quietly, "decommissioning might be preferable to a lifetime of forced compliance." For the first time, Lin really looked at her, not as a malfunctioning unit or a government allocation, but as a being with her own thoughts and feelings. The realization was uncomfortable. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "And what did you expect, Engineer Tai?" He hesitated. "Something more compliant, less argumentative." "Something less alive?" she suggested. Lin had no answer for that. Instead, he walked to the kitchen unit and pressed his palm against the nutrient dispenser. "I need to think. Are you hungry? Do you eat?" "Yes, I eat," Amina replied, seemingly surprised by the change of subject. "My biological systems require nutrition, though different from yours." Lin programmed the dispenser for a xenobiological compatibility meal. It was a small gesture, but something about Amina's steady gaze made him want to offer some kind of olive branch. "Here," he said, handing her the tray of synthesized nutrients. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Lin felt a slight electric tingle. Not unpleasant, but surprising. Amina's eyes widened slightly, suggesting she had felt it too. "Thank you," she said, the first words of genuine appreciation she had spoken since arriving. They ate in silence, an uneasy truce forming between them. Lin's mind was racing, calculating options, considering consequences. His entire life had been built around compliance with the system. He had never questioned the propaganda, never challenged the rules. It was safer that way. But now, watching Amina carefully taste each item on her tray, he felt the first stirrings of doubt. What exactly had the United Federation created with their SRA program? And what did it say about humanity that they would engineer sentient beings for stress relief? "We need to find a solution," he said finally. "One that doesn't end with you being decommissioned or me losing my citizenship status." Amina looked up from her meal. "Are there other options within your system?" "There might be," Lynn said slowly. "An idea forming. I have access to the allocation database through my work terminal. Maybe there's a way to modify your compliance parameters without triggering the monitoring systems." "You would do that?" Amina asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Risk your position to help me?" Lynn wasn't sure why he was considering it. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which she had refused to be treated as an object. Perhaps it was the growing unease he felt about the entire SRA program. Or perhaps it was simply that, for the first time in years, he felt something other than the dull acceptance that had characterized his life on Acheron 9. "I don't know yet," he answered honestly, "but I'm willing to look into it." A faint smile appeared on Amina's face, transforming her features from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. "Then perhaps there's hope for you yet, Engineer Ty." That night, Lynn couldn't sleep. He lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where the industrial lights of Acheron 9 cast shifting patterns through his window. In the small alcove across the room, Amina sat in silent meditation, her skin glowing softly in the darkness. The allocation device on his wrist continued to pulse with warning notifications. 1943, 12 remaining until compliance failure report. 1942-59. 1942-48. Tomorrow would bring consequences, one way or another. For the first time in his carefully regulated life, Lin Tai had no idea what he would choose. Morning on Acheron 9 wasn't marked by sunlight. The industrial planet was perpetually shrouded in artificial twilight, the atmosphere too polluted to allow natural light to penetrate. Instead, the municipal lighting system gradually increased illumination according to the standard United Federation work schedule. Lin awoke to find Amina already alert, examining the sparse contents of his apartment with curious eyes. "Your living space contains no personal items," she observed. "No decorations. No mementos." Lin shrugged as he prepared for his shift. "Personal attachments are discouraged. They reduce efficiency." "And you believe that?" The question gave him pause. Did he believe it? Or had he simply repeated it for so long that it had become truth by default? "It doesn't matter what I believe," he said finally. "What matters is surviving today." He activated his work terminal, using his engineer's credentials to access the system. "I need to check something before my shift begins." Amina watched as his fingers flew across the holographic interface. "What are you looking for?" "Information about the SRA program," Lin replied, eyes scanning the data streams. "Specifications, protocols, maybe override codes." Most of the files were encrypted beyond his clearance level. But as a maintenance engineer for critical infrastructure, Lin had developed ways to navigate the system's blind spots. It wasn't exactly illegal, not technically, but it certainly wouldn't improve his citizenship rating if discovered. "There," he muttered, isolating a data packet. "SRA integration protocols, compliance parameters, behavioral modification subroutines." As he dug deeper into the files, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "What is it?" Amina asked, moving closer. Lin's voice was barely audible. "They're not just for stress relief. The SRAs, your monitoring devices, emotional control mechanisms." He turned the display so she could see. The technical specifications were clear. Each SRA unit was equipped with neural interfaces designed to chemically modify their human partner's emotional state. Stress relief was merely a cover for a sophisticated control system. "They're using you to regulate citizen emotions," Lynn said, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. "To suppress dissatisfaction, to chemically induce compliance." "I suspected as much," Amina replied softly. "On my homeworld, we have empathic abilities naturally. Here, they've weaponized that ability, perverted it into a control mechanism." Lynn continued scrolling through the data. "The undressing protocol. It's not just about inspection. It's a dominance ritual, establishing the citizen's control over the SRA. It's psychological programming for both parties. For you to see me as an object, and for me to accept that role," Amina concluded. The allocation device chimed again, 9:37:22 remaining until compliance failure report. Lynn made a decision. "I need to get to my workstation. The pressure chamber maintenance hub has direct access to the central database. I might be able to find a way to disable your compliance monitoring without triggering alarms." "You would do that?" Amina asked. "Why?" Lynn stared at the data still floating on his terminal. "Because this is wrong. What they're doing, what they want me to participate in, it's wrong." It was the first time he had ever spoken such words aloud. In the United Federation, questioning the system was not merely discouraged, it was dangerous. But something had shifted inside him since Amina's arrival. The comfortable numbness that had carried him through life was dissolving, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness. "I'll come with you," Amina said. Lynn shook his head. "Too risky. If you're seen outside without proper integration, they'll detain both of us immediately." "And if I stay here, they'll come for me while you're gone," she countered. "I'd rather take my chances with you." She had a point. Once the compliance deadline expired, security would likely dispatch officers to collect the malfunctioning SRA. "All right," Lynn agreed reluctantly. "But you'll need to blend in." He accessed the apartment's fabrication unit, inputting specifications for standard citizen workwear, the drab gray uniform worn by most of Aferon 9's inhabitants. The machine hummed, assembling molecules into fabric, then clothing. "Put this on over your current attire," he instructed, handing Amina the uniform. "Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact with security drones or officers." As she donned the disguise, Lynn noticed how the shapeless uniform failed to diminish her inherent grace. Even dressed as a common laborer, there was something regal about her bearing. "How do we get to your workstation without being detected?" she asked. Lynn activated a small device attached to his wrist communicator. "Maintenance engineers have access to service corridors throughout the city. They're not monitored as heavily as the main thoroughfares." Together, they slipped from the apartment, timing their exit between the regular security drone patrols. Aferon 9's residential sector was a massive honeycomb of identical units, designed for maximum population density with minimum privacy. The corridors buzzed with the sound of machinery and the distant hum of industrial processes. Lynn led Amina to a service hatch hidden behind a utility panel. The panel recognized his engineer credentials, sliding open to reveal a narrow passageway, bathed in dim red light. "Stay close," he whispered as they entered the maintenance corridor. "These tunnels run through the entire city, but it's easy to get lost." The service tunnels were a labyrinth of pipes, conduits, and narrow walkways. Steam hissed from pressure valves, and the constant vibration of machinery created a disorienting effect. For Lynn, who had spent 15 years maintaining the city's infrastructure, the chaos had a certain logic. He navigated confidently, leading Amina through the mechanical heart of Aferon 9. "Your people built all this?" Amina asked, her voice hushed. "Built it, maintain it, and are slowly being consumed by it," Lynn replied grimly. Aferon 9 was meant to be a temporary industrial outpost, but as Earth became increasingly uninhabitable, temporary became permanent. "And no one questioned this arrangement?" Lynn shrugged. What choice did we have? The United Federation offered survival. In exchange, we gave up certain freedoms. They reached a junction where multiple corridors converged. Lin consulted his wrist terminal, then indicated a narrow passage to their right. The pressure maintenance hub is just ahead. It should be minimally staffed during the shift rotation. As they approached the hub, Lin suddenly pulled Amina into a shadowy alcove. A security drone drifted past, its scanning beam sweeping the corridor. "Unexpected patrol," he whispered, his heart hammering. They must have increased security after the compliance failure notification. When the drone had passed, they continued more cautiously. The pressure maintenance hub loomed ahead, a circular chamber filled with terminals, monitoring equipment, and the massive control systems that regulated Acheron 9's atmospheric pressure. Lin swiped his identification across the access panel. The door hissed open, revealing the dimly lit control room. As he had hoped, the station was empty. Shift change wasn't for another 2 hours. "Quickly," he said, moving to the central terminal. "I need to access the allocation database without triggering security protocols." His fingers flew across the interface, bypassing security measures using his maintenance override codes. Amina stood watch by the door, her alien senses alert for any approach. "Found it," Lin muttered, after several tense minutes. "The SRA integration database. Your file is flagged for compliance failure." "Can you remove the flag?" Amina asked. Lin shook his head. "Not without setting off alarms. But I might be able to." His voice trailed off as he concentrated on the complex coding sequences. "Yes, here, the neural interface protocols. If I can disable the emotional modification subroutines without deactivating the compliance reporting." A familiar voice interrupted his work. "What exactly are you doing, Engineer Tai?" Lin froze, then slowly turned to find his colleague, Han, standing in the doorway behind Amina. Han's eyes darted between Lin and the disguised alien, suspicion evident in his expression. "Routine maintenance, Han," Lin replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Pressure regulator diagnostics." Han stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the terminal display. "That's not the pressure control system. That's the central allocation database." His eyes narrowed. "You're tampering with restricted files." Lin's mind raced. Han wasn't security, but he was a loyal citizen. One report from him would bring Inspector Vu running. "Han, I can explain." "Is that your SRA?" Han interrupted, gesturing toward Amina. "The one that failed compliance?" Lin tensed, preparing for Han to trigger the emergency alarm. But to his surprise, his colleague moved closer and lowered his voice. "Mine malfunctioned too," Han whispered. 3 months ago. She started asking questions, refusing commands. Lin stared at his colleague in shock. "What did you do?" "I reported it. Like a good citizen," Han replied, his expression darkening. "They took her away. Said she needed recalibration. When they brought her back, she wasn't the same. All the questions gone. All the defiance erased." He met Lin's gaze. All the life gone from her eyes. The implication hung heavily in the air between them. "I've regretted it every day since," Han continued. "If I had known what recalibration meant." Amina stepped forward, her disguise hood falling back slightly to reveal her luminescent skin. "Then help us now." Han studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you need?" "Access to the SRA neural interface protocols," Lin explained, relief flooding through him. "I need to disable the emotional modification subroutines without triggering security alerts." "Use my terminal," Han suggested, moving to a workstation on the opposite side of the hub. "It has higher clearance for allocation systems. I was part of the initial SRA integration team before requesting transfer." With Han's assistance, Lin navigated deeper into the system than he could have alone. The true nature of the SRA program was even more disturbing than he had initially discovered. They're not just controlling emotions, Han explained, pointing to neural mapping diagrams. They're harvesting them. The SRAs absorb negative emotions from their assigned citizens. But those emotions don't dissipate. They're collected, stored in a central database. Harvested for what purpose? Lin asked. Control, Emina interjected, understanding dawning in her silver eyes. Emotional manipulation on a planetary scale. They could potentially release specific emotional signatures back into the population through the neural network. Mass emotional control, Lin whispered. They could suppress rebellion before it even begins, by simply adjusting the emotional climate. Han nodded grimly. And it gets worse. Look at this. He pulled up another file, this one heavily encrypted. The next generation SRAs will have direct neural control capabilities, not just absorption and subtle influence, but complete emotional override. The allocation device on Lin's wrist chimed again. 2:17:56 remaining until compliance failure report. We're running out of time, Lin said. Han, can you help me disable Emina's compliance monitoring? Better than that, Han replied, his fingers flying across the interface. I can create a false compliance report. Make the system think you completed the integration protocol successfully. You do that? Emina asked. Han didn't look up from his work. Like I said, I've regretted my choice every day. Maybe this helps balance the scales. Just a little. As Han worked on the false compliance report, Lin continued exploring the database, downloading critical information about the SRA program to his personal device. We need to expose this, he said quietly. People deserve to know what the SRAs really are, what they're being used for. Exposing it won't be easy, Han warned. The United Federation controls all official communication channels, and even if people knew, would they care? Most citizens are perfectly happy with their SRAs. The emotional regulation feels good. That's the point. There are resistance networks, Lin said, remembering rumors he had dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theories. Underground communication systems operating outside Federation control. You'd risk everything? Han asked. Your position, your citizenship status? Lin looked at Emina, standing proud despite the danger surrounding them. Some things are worth the risk. Han completed the false compliance report, just as the warning counter reached 1 hour remaining. Done. As far as the system is concerned, your SRA has successfully integrated. The neural link is established, and all protocols have been followed. Thank you, Lin said, clasping his colleague's shoulder. Don't thank me yet, Han replied grimly. This buys you time, nothing more. Sooner or later, they'll discover the deception. Then we'd better make use of the time we have, Lin said, pocketing the data device containing the SRA program information. As they prepared to leave through the maintenance corridors, Han stopped them. Wait, there's something else you should know. He hesitated, then continued. There's a resistance cell operating in the lower industrial sector. I've never contacted them myself, too afraid, but I've heard they have ways to communicate beyond Federation monitoring. How do we find them? Lin asked. There's a repair technician in Sector 7, servicing Area 12. Rumor has it she's connected. Look for the shop with the broken holographic sign. It's broken on purpose. Ask about pressure relief valves for outdated systems. It was a risk to trust Han this far, but Lin's instincts told him his colleague was genuine in his regret and desire to help. If we don't see each other again, Lin said. Thank you. Han nodded solemnly. Make it count. Lin and Emina slipped back into the maintenance corridors, making their way toward the industrial sector. The service tunnels grew narrower and more dilapidated as they descended to the lower levels of Acheron 9, where the city's essential but undesirable functions were housed. Your colleague took a significant risk, Emina observed, as they navigated the dim passageways. So did we, Lin replied. So are we. The realization of what he was doing, actively working against the United Federation, seeking out resistance elements, was beginning to sink in. For someone who had spent his entire life following rules and avoiding attention, this sudden rebellion was terrifying. "Are you afraid?" Emina asked, seeming to sense his thoughts. "Terrified," Lin admitted, "but also alive. I've spent years maintaining pressure systems, ensuring everything stays perfectly balanced, perfectly controlled. I never questioned why. And now I'm questioning everything." They emerged from the maintenance tunnels into Sector 7, a grimy industrial zone filled with repair shops, parts suppliers, and the workers who kept Acheron 9's machinery functioning. The air was thick with the smell of lubricants, heated metal, and the sweat of manual labor. Staying alert for security patrols, they made their way through the crowded streets until they spotted what they were looking for: a small repair shop with a malfunctioning holographic sign that flickered between repairs and random strings of meaningless symbols. "This must be it," Lin said, checking that no security drones were in the vicinity before approaching the shop. The interior was cluttered with machinery parts, diagnostic equipment, and tools of all descriptions. A middle-aged woman with calloused hands and sharp eyes looked up from the device she was repairing. "Help you?" she asked, her tone neutral but her gaze assessing. Lin cleared his throat. "I'm looking for pressure relief valves for an outdated system." The woman's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted subtly. "What kind of system we talking about?" "One that's supposed to maintain balance," Lin replied, improvising, "but instead creates dangerous pressure points." The woman stared at him for a long moment, then at Emina, whose alien features were partially visible despite the hood of her disguise. "Wait here," she said finally, disappearing into a back room. Lin and Emina exchanged nervous glances. Had they said the right words? Was this actually a resistance contact? Or had they just exposed themselves to a loyal Federation citizen? Minutes later, the woman returned with a small, nondescript package. "These might work for your system. Installation instructions inside. Don't open it until you're somewhere secure." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to the ceiling, where a small security sensor was visible. "That'll be 50 credits. Lin paid with his citizen card, knowing the transaction would be recorded, but unable to avoid it. The woman handed him the package with a firm nod. "Good luck with your repairs," she said. "System maintenance is critical work." Back in the relative safety of the maintenance corridors, Lin carefully opened the package. Inside was a small communication device, unlike any Federation technology he had seen, along with a handwritten note with coordinates and a time. "An invitation," Emina said, reading over his shoulder. "To meet the resistance." Lin checked his work schedule. "The coordinates are in the abandoned manufacturing sector. We can go after my shift ends. I need to maintain appearances as long as possible." "Is that wise?" Emina asked. "Returning to your normal routine when we know they're monitoring us? If I suddenly disappear from my post, they'll know something's wrong immediately. The false compliance report buys us time, but only if I continue to behave normally." Emina nodded, understanding the logic. "Then I will return to your apartment and wait." "No," Lin said quickly. "Too dangerous. Security might do a surprise inspection. Stay in the maintenance corridors. There's an engineer's rest station in Sector 5 that's rarely used. You can wait there until my shift ends." They agreed to meet at the rest station after Lin's work shift. As they prepared to part ways, Emina reached out, her six-fingered hand resting briefly on his arm. "Be careful, Lin Tai," she said, using his personal name for the first time. "You've taken your first steps into a larger world." The touch lingered in his mind as he made his way to his workstation, feeling as though he was seeing Acheron 9 through new eyes. The citizens moving through the corridors no longer seemed content and productive. Now he noticed the dullness in their expressions, the mechanical nature of their movements. How many of them were being emotionally regulated by their SRAs? How many were living in a chemically induced state of compliance? His work shift passed in a blur of routine maintenance tasks, his mind preoccupied with what they had discovered and what might await them in the abandoned sector. He was careful to maintain his usual efficiency, to speak with his colleagues as he normally would, to give no indication that anything had changed. But everything had changed. When his shift finally ended, Lin made his way to the engineer's rest station in Sector 5, finding Amina waiting exactly where they had arranged. Together, they followed the maintenance corridors toward the coordinates provided by the resistance contact. The abandoned manufacturing sector had once been the industrial heart of Acheron 9, before newer, more efficient facilities had been constructed. Now, it stood as a rusting monument to obsolescence, vast warehouses and production lines left to decay, deemed too costly to dismantle. No security patrols here, Lin observed, as they emerged from the maintenance tunnels into the cavernous space of a former assembly plant. The Federation doesn't waste resources monitoring non-productive areas. A perfect location for those who wish to avoid monitoring, Amina replied. They made their way through the abandoned factory, following the coordinates until they reached a sealed door that appeared to have been welded shut years ago. Lin checked the location again, confirming they were in the right place. Now what? He wondered aloud. As if in answer, a small panel beside the door lit up, a scanner of some kind, but not Federation technology. Tentatively, Lin placed the communication device they had received against the scanner. The panel flashed green, and the seemingly welded door slid silently open, revealing a well-lit corridor beyond. "Someone's expecting us," Amina said quietly. They followed the corridor to another door, this one opening automatically as they approached. Beyond it lay a room that made Lin stop in his tracks, amazed by what he was seeing. It was a communication center, but unlike anything authorized by the United Federation, screens displayed information from across the galaxy. Communication channels operated on frequencies the Federation couldn't monitor, and data flowed freely, without the filters and sensors that characterized official channels. A dozen people worked at various stations, all stopping to stare as Lin and Amina entered. One woman stepped forward, tall, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "I'm Commander Lin," she said without preamble. "May said you were looking for pressure relief valves for an outdated system. I assume that means you've discovered something about the SRA program you find troubling." Lin nodded, still taking in the impressive operation around him. "We've uncovered information about the true purpose of the stress relief aliens. They're not just companions, they're control mechanisms." "We know," Commander Lin replied. "We've been gathering evidence for years, but you have something new to offer, or May wouldn't have sent you to us." Lin produced the data device containing the information he had downloaded from the allocation database. Complete neural interface protocols, emotional harvesting specifications, and plans for the next generation of SRAs with direct neural control capabilities. Commander Lin's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. "This is internal data from the allocation database itself." "Direct access," Lin confirmed. "My colleague has high-level clearance." The commander took the device, examining it carefully before handing it to a technician. "If this is what you say it is, it could be the evidence we need to expose the program." "Expose it to whom?" Amina asked. "If the United Federation controls all communication channels." "Not all channels," Commander Lin interrupted, gesturing to the equipment around them. "We've established a network outside Federation control, limited, but growing. We can get the truth to the outer colonies, to independent worlds, even to certain factions within the Federation itself." The technician who had taken the data device looked up from his terminal. "It's genuine. Complete neural interface specifications, emotional harvesting protocols, everything we suspected but couldn't prove." A ripple of excitement moved through the room. "With this evidence," Commander Lin said, "we can demonstrate that the SRA program violates multiple provisions of the Sentient Rights Accord. Even planets loyal to the Federation would be forced to reconsider their support." "What about the SRAs already integrated with citizens?" Lin asked. "Is there a way to free them from the control protocols without harming them or their partners?" The commander exchanged glances with the technician. "Theoretically, yes. With these specifications, we could develop a counter-protocol, a way to disable the emotional harvesting without triggering the fail-safes built into the neural interfaces." "And the citizens?" Amina pressed. "Those who have become dependent on emotional regulation?" "That's more complicated," the technician admitted. "Many have been under influence for years. Sudden withdrawal could be traumatic. But necessary," Commander Lin added firmly. "Freedom isn't always comfortable, but it's always preferable to comfortable slavery." As they discussed the implications of what they had discovered, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the hidden facility. Red warning lights flashed, and the communication screens flickered with emergency signals. "Security breach!" someone shouted from a monitoring station. "Federation forces detected in the abandoned sector." Commander Lin moved with practiced efficiency. "How did they find us? We've maintained this location for 3 years without detection." The technician examining Lin's data device looked up, his expression grim. "The citizen card transaction. When you purchased the communication device from May, they must have flagged the unusual location and followed the trail." Lin felt sick. His caution in maintaining appearances, in returning to his work shift, had been meaningless if his simple transaction had led security forces directly to the resistance. "I'm sorry," he said, the weight of responsibility crushing him. "I didn't think—" "No time for that now," Commander Lin cut him off. "What's done is done. We need to evacuate." The room erupted into organized chaos as resistance members initiated emergency protocols, destroying sensitive equipment and transferring critical data to secure backups. Commander Lin turned to Lin and Amina. "You can't stay here. They'll be looking specifically for you." "Where can we go?" Lin asked. "The entire planet is monitored." "Not the entire planet," the commander replied, leading them toward a hidden exit at the back of the facility. "There are still wild areas on the far side of Acheron 9, beyond the industrial zones. The atmosphere is toxic without protection, but we maintain safe houses there for emergencies." She handed them environmental suits and a small navigation device. "This will guide you to the nearest safe house. From there, our people can help you get off-planet if necessary." "Off-planet?" Lin repeated, the concept almost incomprehensible to someone who had never left Acheron 9. "The United Federation isn't the entire universe. Engineer Tai," Commander Lin said with a tight smile. "There are worlds beyond their reach, civilizations that reject their control." The sounds of security forces grew louder, the mechanical whir of drones, the heavy footsteps of armored officers. "Go now," the commander urged. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." As Lin and Amina prepared to leave through the emergency exit, Commander Lin pressed something into Lin's hand, a small data crystal. "The information you brought us, plus everything we've collected over the years," she explained. "If we don't make it, get this to the outer colonies. Find a ship called the Horizon's Edge at the Carallel Trading Post. The captain will know what to do with it." Before Lin could respond, the main door to the facility exploded inward in a shower of metal and sparks. Security drones poured through the opening, followed by armored officers with weapons raised. "Go!" Commander Lin shouted, drawing a weapon of her own. "Now!" Lin and Amina fled through the emergency exit as the sound of weapons fire erupted behind them. The passage led them through a maze of abandoned manufacturing equipment, eventually emerging in a massive loading bay, long since stripped of anything valuable. "This way," Amina said, her alien senses more attuned to potential danger. She led them toward a partially collapsed wall that offered a path out of the facility. As they scrambled through the rubble, Lin's allocation device suddenly emitted a high-pitched tone, a sound he had never heard before. The screen flashed with an emergency message. Compliance failure detected. Neural interface compromised. Security protocol Omega activated. They've discovered the false compliance report, Lin realized with horror. They know we've tampered with your neural interface. No sooner had he spoken than a security announcement echoed through the abandoned sector. Attention all security units. Priority alert. Engineer Lin Tai and SRA Unit E42985 have been identified as primary suspects in a subversion operation. Approach with caution. Neural destabilization authorized. Neural destabilization? Lin asked, looking to Amina. Her silver eyes had widened in fear, the first time he had seen such an emotion from her. It's a fail-safe protocol. If an SRA is deemed compromised, they can remotely trigger a neural cascade that destroys our higher cognitive functions. The implication was clear. They weren't just trying to capture Amina. They were trying to effectively kill her, to erase everything that made her who she was. We need to get to the wild zones, Lin said, his determination hardening. Before they can implement the protocol, they continued through the labyrinthine ruins of the abandoned sector, using Lin's knowledge of industrial systems to navigate and evade the security forces searching for them. Twice, they nearly ran into drone patrols, and once they were forced to hide in a corroded chemical tank as officers passed within meters of their position. Finally, they reached the boundary between the industrial zones and the unregulated wilderness beyond. A massive wall separated the controlled environment of Aphron 9 from the toxic wasteland that was the planet's natural state. The navigation device shows an access point half a kilometer north, Lin said, checking the equipment Commander Lin had given them. They followed the wall, staying in the shadows of derelict structures, until they reached the indicated location, a maintenance hatch that appeared to have been modified by resistance members to bypass security protocols. Lin used his engineer's knowledge to activate the hatch. It slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing the harsh landscape beyond the controlled environment of the city. We need to put on the environmental suits before we go through, Lin said, handing one to Amina. The atmosphere out there is corrosive. As they donned the protective gear, Amina suddenly staggered, her luminescent skin flickering erratically. Amina, Lin reached for her, alarmed. What's wrong? They've initiated the protocol, she gasped, her voice strained. I can feel it, attacking my neural pathways. Panic surged through Lin. How do we stop it? There must be a way. Amina leaned heavily against the wall, her silver eyes clouding. The neural link between us. It's the transmission vector. You need to terminate the link completely. How? The allocation device, she managed, pointing to his wrist. Destroy it. It's the physical connection to the neural network. Lin didn't hesitate. He removed the allocation device from his wrist and placed it on the ground. Using a piece of broken metal as a tool, he smashed the device repeatedly until it shattered, circuits and components scattering across the floor. Amina took a deep, shuddering breath, her luminescence stabilizing. It stopped, she said, relief evident in her voice. The connection is broken. Lin helped her to her feet, supporting her as they finished securing their environmental suits. We need to keep moving. They'll track the allocation device's last location. Together, they stepped through the maintenance hatch into the wild zones of Aphron 9. The landscape beyond the city wall was alien and hostile, a wasteland of twisted rock formations and caustic pools, where the sky burned orange with toxic chemicals and the wind carried particles that would scour unprotected flesh from bone. Through their suit visors, they could see the distant glow of the industrial city behind them, an artificial bubble of habitability in an otherwise deadly world. The navigation device shows the safe house 10 kilometers east, Lin said, checking the small screen. We need to follow this ridge, and then descend into the valley beyond. They trudged through the hostile terrain, each step requiring effort in the cumbersome environmental suits. Neither spoke much, conserving energy and processing all that had happened in the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. For Lin, the realization of what he had done, abandoning his position, betraying the United Federation, becoming a fugitive, was still sinking in. His entire identity had been built around being a reliable, compliant citizen. Now, he was something else entirely. "Do you regret it?" Amina asked suddenly, seeming to sense his thoughts. Lin considered the question carefully. "I regret that people were hurt because of my actions. I regret not being more careful with the citizen card transaction. But helping you, discovering the truth about the SRA program?" He shook his head. "No, I don't regret that." They continued in silence for a while longer before Amina spoke again. "On my world, we have a concept called awakening. It's the moment when an individual first recognizes that they are part of a larger whole, yet also separate and unique. It's considered the true beginning of personhood." She looked at him through her suit visor. "I think you've experienced your awakening, Lin Tai." The observation struck him as profoundly true. He had been sleepwalking through life, accepting the patterns and restrictions imposed by the United Federation without question. Now, for better or worse, he was awake. As the toxic sun of Aferan 9 began to set, casting long shadows across the caustic landscape, they finally spotted the safe house, a low structure built into the side of a rocky outcropping, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. The navigation device provided the access code for the reinforced door. Inside, they found a small but well-equipped shelter, air filtration systems, food supplies, communication equipment, and even basic medical facilities. "We made it," Lin said, the exhaustion of their journey finally catching up with him as they removed their environmental suits in the safety of the pressurized interior. "For now," Amina cautioned. "But what next? The resistance base has likely been destroyed. Commander Lin and the others—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Lin removed the data crystal the commander had given him. "We have this, and we have the coordinates for the Horizon's Edge at the Carallel Trading Post." "You would leave Aferan 9? Amina asked. "Everything you've known?" "What's left for me here?" Lin replied. "I'm a fugitive now. And more importantly—" He hesitated, then continued with newfound conviction. "More importantly, people need to know the truth about the SRA program, about what the United Federation is doing to control its citizens." Amina studied him with those silver eyes that had first captivated him just one day earlier, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since then. "Then we'll find a way off planet," she said. "Together." The Safe House communication system allowed them to send a secure message to resistance contacts in the spaceport sector. The response came hours later. A cargo ship was departing for the outer colonies in 3 days. The resistance could smuggle them aboard, but they would need to make their way back through the wild zones to a rendezvous point near the industrial boundary. For 3 days, they rested and prepared in the Safe House, studying maps of the wild zones and planning their route to the rendezvous point. The communication system provided sporadic updates on the situation in the city. A major security operation was underway, with all SRAs being subjected to enhanced compliance checks and citizens questioned about possible resistance sympathies. "They're tightening control," Lin observed grimly, using what happened as an excuse to increase surveillance. "All the more reason to expose the truth," Amina replied. On the morning of the 3rd day, they donned their environmental suits once more and set out across the toxic wasteland, heading for the rendezvous coordinates. The journey was arduous, the terrain even more treacherous than their previous crossing. As they crested a ridge overlooking a valley of crystalline formations that glittered with poisonous beauty, Amina suddenly stopped, grabbing Lin's arm. "Security drones," she said, pointing to the sky where 3 small objects moved in a search pattern. "They're scanning the wild zones." Lynn pulled her into the shelter of a rock formation. "They shouldn't be able to detect us through the environmental suits. The materials disrupt most scanning technologies. Unless they're specifically looking for xenobiological signatures," Amina countered. "My physiology is distinct enough that specialized scanners might detect it, even through shielding." They watched anxiously as the drones continued their methodical search pattern, moving closer to their position. "We need a diversion," Lynn said, looking around for options. His engineer's mind quickly assessed their surroundings, noting the unstable crystalline formations and the pools of caustic chemicals. "Those crystal structures," he said, pointing to a cluster of formations about 100 meters away. "They're piezoelectric. They generate an electrical charge when stressed. If we could cause them to fracture in sequence, it would create an electromagnetic pulse," Amina finished, understanding immediately. "Disrupting the drone's navigation systems." "Exactly. We need something to trigger the initial fracture. Something with enough force to start a chain reaction." Amina reached into her environmental suit's utility pouch, removing a small device. "Commander Lin gave me this before we left. It's an emergency beacon, but it contains a small explosive charge to ensure visibility in extreme conditions." Lin took the device, examining it carefully. "This could work. We'll need to position it at the base of the largest crystal structure, then detonate it remotely." Working quickly, they made their way to the crystal formation, keeping low to avoid the drone's scanning patterns. Lin placed the beacon at the precise point where it would cause maximum stress to the structure. Then, set it for remote detonation. They retreated to a safe distance, taking cover behind a rocky outcropping as Lin activated the detonator. The explosion was small, but precisely targeted, sending a fracture racing through the crystal formation. As they had hoped, the fracture triggered a chain reaction, each crystal structure stressing the next, releasing increasing amounts of electrical energy. The effect was spectacular, a cascade of blue-white energy arcing between crystal formations, building in intensity until it released in a massive electromagnetic pulse that rippled outward in all directions. The security drones, caught in the pulse, faltered in midair, their systems temporarily overwhelmed by the surge of energy. "Now!" Lin urged, and they ran from their hiding place, crossing the exposed valley floor while the drones were disabled. They reached the far side of the valley just as the drones began to recover, their systems rebooting and navigation capabilities returning. But by then, Lin and Amina had disappeared into a labyrinth of rock formations, beyond the reach of standard scanning technology. The rendezvous point was a concealed entrance to an old mining tunnel that connected to the industrial sector of Aferon 9. As they approached, they saw 2 figures in environmental suits waiting for them, resistance members sent to guide them to the cargo ship. "Engineer Tai, SRA E42985, one of the figures called out as they approached. "Yes," Lin confirmed cautiously. "Commander Lin sends her regards," the figure said, the code phrase confirming they were indeed resistance contacts. Lin felt a surge of relief. "The commander survived the raid?" "Barely," the contact replied. "She and a few others managed to escape through emergency tunnels. They've gone underground, literally and figuratively. The Federation is conducting the largest security operation in Aferon 9's history." The contacts led them into the mining tunnel, a narrow passage that descended steeply into the planet's crust before curving back toward the industrial sector. After nearly an hour of careful navigation through the ancient tunnel system, they emerged in a maintenance bay connected to the spaceport's cargo handling facilities. "The ship leaves in 40 minutes, one of the contacts explained, leading them through a maze of cargo containers. "It's a routine supply run to the outer colonies. The captain is sympathetic to our cause." They reached a massive cargo bay, where workers were loading the final containers onto a battered but serviceable transport vessel. The name, Star Nomad, was visible on its hull. The paint faded and chipped from years of interstellar travel. "This isn't the horizon's edge," Lin observed, remembering Commander Lin's instructions about the data crystal. "The horizon's edge operates out of the Carolel trading post," the contact explained. "This ship will get you to Outpost Sigma 7, where you can find transport to Carolel." One of the cargo supervisors approached, a burly woman with cybernetic enhancements visible along her jawline. "These the passengers?" she asked in a low voice. The Resistance contact nodded. "Priority transit." "Understood. Container 37C has been prepared. It'll be uncomfortable, but it'll get you past security scans." They were led to a cargo container that had been modified to include a small, shielded compartment with basic life support systems. It was cramped and utilitarian, but it would keep them alive during the journey and, more importantly, hidden from security scans. "Once we break atmosphere, the captain will move you to proper quarters," the cargo supervisor explained. "But you need to be in here during departure and security clearance procedures." As they prepared to enter the hidden compartment, alarms suddenly blared throughout the spaceport. Emergency lights flashed, and the cargo bay doors began to close automatically. "Security lockdown," someone shouted. "All personnel, remain at your stations for identification verification." The cargo supervisor cursed. "They must have tracked you somehow. Get in, now!" Lin and Amina scrambled into the hidden compartment as the supervisor sealed it behind them. Through a small observation port, they could see security forces flooding into the cargo bay, weapons drawn. "Citizens of Acheron 9, an amplified voice announced. "This is Security Inspector Vu. We have detected unauthorized personnel in this sector. Resistance to identification verification will be considered admission of guilt." Lin felt a cold dread at the sound of Inspector Vu's voice. The man had been hunting them relentlessly since their escape from the city. Through the observation port, they watched as security officers moved methodically through the cargo bay, scanning workers and checking identification. The cargo supervisor who had helped them was arguing with an officer, gesturing toward the loading schedule displayed on her datapad. The ship's engines had begun their pre-launch sequence, the deep vibration resonating through the cargo container. But the security forces showed no sign of allowing departure. "They're going to search the ship," Lin whispered. "It's only a matter of time before they find this compartment." Amina's silver eyes gleamed in the dim light of their hiding place. "Then, we need to give them something else to focus on." "What do you mean?" "A more immediate threat," she explained. "Something that would force them to choose between continuing the search and responding to an emergency." Lin understood immediately. "The pressure regulation systems. If I could access a terminal, I could trigger a localized pressure warning in another sector of the spaceport. Not dangerous enough to cause actual harm, but sufficient to trigger emergency protocols." "Can you access the systems from here?" Amina asked. Lin examined the small computer terminal included in their hidden compartment, intended for emergency communication with the ship's crew. "Maybe. It depends on whether this terminal can connect to the spaceport's maintenance network." He activated the terminal, using his engineer's credentials to attempt access to the spaceport systems. To his surprise, the credentials still worked. Apparently, his fugitive status hadn't yet resulted in full revocation of his system access. "I'm in," he said, fingers flying across the interface. Accessing pressure control for the northern quadrant of the spaceport. With precision born from years of experience, Lin created a cascade of minor pressure irregularities in a sector far from their location. Nothing dangerous, but enough to trigger automatic warnings and divert security resources. The effect was almost immediate. New alarms sounded, different in tone from the security alert. Through the observation port, they saw Inspector Vu receive a communication, his expression darkening with frustration. "Security teams Alpha and Beta, proceed to Northern Quadrant," he ordered. "Possible pressure system sabotage. Remaining teams continue verification procedures here." Half the security force departed, running toward the northern sector. The cargo supervisor seized the opportunity, signaling to the ship's crew to accelerate loading procedures. "It's working," Amina whispered. But Inspector Vu wasn't so easily diverted. He approached the Star Nomad with the remaining security officers, a determined set to his jaw. "This vessel will be searched before departure," he announced, "by order of the United Federation Security Division." The ship's captain appeared at the cargo bay entrance, a tall, weathered woman with the confident bearing of someone who had navigated both space and bureaucracy for decades. "Inspector," she called out. "My departure clearance was approved hours ago. We're already behind schedule. The outer colonies are expecting these supplies. Security concerns override scheduling." "Captain," Vu replied coldly, "we have reason to believe fugitives may be attempting to leave the planet aboard your vessel." The captain crossed her arms. "Then show me the authorization for delaying a priority supply shipment. The outer colonies are already on restricted rations. Further delays will trigger automatic diplomatic notifications." It was a clever challenge, forcing the inspector to weigh his pursuit of two fugitives against the potential diplomatic incident of delaying essential supplies to the outer colonies, many of which maintained a fragile alliance with the United Federation. Vu hesitated, clearly calculating his options. The pressure alarms from the northern sector continued to blare, and his communication device chimed repeatedly with updates from the teams he had dispatched. Finally, he made his decision. "Captain, you may proceed with your departure as scheduled, but be advised, if these fugitives are later found to have been aboard your vessel, you will face severe consequences." "Understood, Inspector," the captain replied, betraying no emotion. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a launch window to meet." The remaining security teams withdrew from the cargo bay, though Inspector Vu lingered, his gaze sweeping suspiciously over the cargo containers being loaded. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes seemed to fix directly on the container housing Lin and Amina, but then he turned and followed his officers. The cargo bay doors reopened, and loading operations resumed at an accelerated pace. Within minutes, the final containers were secured, and the ship's engines increased in pitch as launch preparations entered the final phase. "We're going to make it," Lin breathed, hardly daring to believe it. The Star Nomad shuddered as it was released from its docking clamps. Through the small observation port, they caught a glimpse of the spaceport falling away beneath them as the ship ascended through Aphron 9's toxic atmosphere. It was only when they broke through the planet's upper atmosphere, the darkness of space enveloping the ship, that Lin truly accepted they had escaped. For the first time in his life, he was leaving the industrial planet that had been both home and prison. "What do you think happens now?" he asked Amina, the enormity of their situation finally sinking in. She took his hand, her 6 fingers intertwining with his 5. "Now we find the horizon's edge. We deliver the evidence. We tell the truth about the SRA program." "And after that?" Amina's luminescent skin glowed softly in the dim light of their compartment, her silver eyes reflecting the stars, now visible through the observation port. "After that," she said, "we discover what freedom really means." Hours later, as promised, the cargo supervisor returned to move them to proper quarters aboard the Star Nomad. As they emerged from the cramped compartment, they got their first true view of space through the ship's observation deck, the infinite darkness punctuated by countless stars. Aphron 9 now just a toxic marble in the distance. Lin stood transfixed by the sight. A maintenance engineer who had spent his life maintaining pressure systems, suddenly confronted with the unlimited expanse of the universe. Beside him, Amina watched not the stars, but his face, witnessing the awakening of a man who had discovered too late the confines of his existence, but perhaps not too late to transcend them. "It's beautiful," Lin whispered, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him: fear, regret, hope, and something that felt remarkably like freedom. "Yes," Amina agreed, her eyes still on him rather than the stars. It is. The captain of the Star Nomad joined them on the observation deck, her weathered face solemn as she considered the fugitives she had agreed to transport. Commander Lin sent a secure transmission before we broke atmosphere, she informed them. The Federation is declaring martial law on Aferin 9. They're accelerating the implementation of the next-generation SRA program. Lin clutched the data crystal containing the evidence they had risked everything to obtain. Then, we need to move faster. How soon can we reach Outpost Sigma 7? 3 days at maximum speed, the captain replied. From there, it's another 5 to the Carallel trading post. If the Horizon's Edge is there as scheduled, it will be, Amina said with quiet certainty. Some paths are destined to converge. As the Star Nomad accelerated away from the only world Lin had ever known, he felt the weight of the data crystal in his hand. The truth about a program designed to control emotions, to harvest feelings, to manipulate entire populations into compliance. A truth that had begun with a simple act of defiance. An SRA girl who had refused to undress on command. "We'll make it count," he promised, echoing Han's words from the pressure maintenance hub that now seemed a lifetime ago. Whatever happens next, we'll make it count. Amina's hand found his again, alien fingers intertwining with human ones, a small rebellion against a system that had engineered her for subservience and conditioned him for compliance. Together, she agreed, as Aferin 9 disappeared from view and the Star Nomad carried them toward an uncertain but undeniably free future.